Welcome back to the Let's Talk Vibes podcast, where we speak soul contracts, illuminating the path to higher understanding. This week, Yiannah and I are joined by a fellow soul contract practitioner, Ahzure Hercules Uriel, in order to discuss the 15-6 energy. Welcome, Ahzure.
Hi, Lauren. Hi, Yiannah.
Hi.
Well, before we dive into that, Ahzure is interesting. I was reading about you, and you mentioned that you study with all these ascended masters as part of the Great Light Brotherhood. And I actually feel like that's very fitting for the 15-6 energy that we're going to get into because it's this exploratory energy. So before we get into the energy, talk to us a little bit about that. How did you get started with that? How did you find yourself studying with these ascended masters?
If I have to recommend one book that changed my life, it would be called Unveiled Mysteries by Godfrey
Mm.
Ray King. In there, he talks about a man who goes up Mount Shasta, which is in America, and he meets this ascended master, Saint Germain, who previously embodied as Merlin, Joseph, father of Jesus, Christopher Columbus, a lot of people. Anyways, and it reads like a fiction. You wouldn't like if you just read that off the back, it's like seems like fantasy. The places they saw, ancient civilizations, Atlantis, Sahara. And I had always wondered, like, what is it about religion that kind of turns me off? Like, there's something too dogmatic, something, I was raised a Buddhist and I went to Catholic schools and, studied other philosophies, but I was just like, there's always something weird about it. Anyways, this book sort of opened my mind to that they're actually all working together. All the religions are doing the same thing, and
Yeah.
that's what I think we're going to be talking about anyways is the spirituality. Like we're all getting to know who I am inside is that at the core of it, and that is the spiritual nature of everyone. So even these numbers are all pointing in some way like you're most accomplished when you're tapping into that spiritual nature of the self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so perfect to transition us into our topic for today, our number, the 15-6, because the 15, it's all about feeling God within and without. And it's about that deep, interconnection, I would say, into the spiritual. And, we even say that if this number is in the soul destiny or in the spiritual goals of someone's chart, that often it's kind of this preparatory life. This incarnation is to prepare you for your next incarnation where you're much more firmly on the spiritual path. So I definitely see it as one of those spiritual seekers. And it's interesting, again, I always bring up the astrology. I can't help it. This is our Sagittarius energy. And Sagittarius, for those who are familiar with astrology, is again very much, about philosophy and has that spiritual seeking energy as well. So it's a great kind of overlap there. But where does it show up in your chart?
I have it on my worldly goals or, physical goals.
Okay. Yeah, that's where it is in my common use name, but you have it in your birth name. Is that right?
Birth and phonetic. Yeah.
What about for you, Yiannah? Do you have this number in your chart?
Well, it's interesting. I actually have all my charts up. So that's why I'm not staring off
On
into
the
space.
wall.
No one's talking to me. It's actually right there. And I'm like, I know I had it. So it was in my common name. So we've talked about this before in the podcast. My birth name was never used a day in my life. But my immediate name that was given was Yiannah Manokas. And so in that name, I actually have it in my physical talents. So,
Okay.
I mean, since literally from the day I was born, and it's a name I still go by, although, I haven't added that beautiful H. But yeah, that's where it is. And it's funny because I never really give it too much attention. But then when I remember that I have that 15-6, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Like it
Yeah.
totally fits in.
Lauren, where is it in yours?
It's in my common use name in the physical goals as well.
Your physical.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get into it. What are some of the challenges that this number, will face? I know for me, one of the first things that comes to mind is really the element that comes through from the six specifically. Well, it's both. It's shared by both, but it's that can kind of have that lack of focus and trying to do too many things at once. I love to use that analogy of those spinning plates. You're trying to spin too many plates and then they all crash on the floor, right? And that's been, I think, up until now, I think that's been the big way that that energy is showing up in my life. But there's this other element to it, which it's about, your stomach as a barometer and learning to kind of recognize and find your own truth and just connect into your inner feeling. And I feel like in this year of 2024, I'm starting to see that aspect of it show up more and be more of where the focus is in some ways, because I think it's sort of, not to say I've mastered the other side of it, but it's kind of like it's not as challenging as it once. I've learned the skills in order to deal with that, which is to be really mindful of, you can't handle 6 projects at one time. So when you already have 3 going, everything else is a no, unless you're willing to stop one of those existing 3 to take on the new project. So it's kind of like, okay, we're going to move on to a new area. Let's continue to grow and expand. But what about for you? How does it show up for you?
Yeah, I'll look at the 15 first, and the 6 will inevitably fall into it. But I like to look at the symbol. It's a huge disc and then
Yeah.
inner disc. I
Yeah.
kind of look at that as, you ever look through a tunnel or a pipe,
Yeah.
and you're looking through the tube, and you see the bigger circle, and then at the end of the tube is the other smaller circle, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of look at it like that, where you're constantly looking at things, you're trying to focus on one thing. But imagine if you have this telescope and you're looking at the star, the whole constellation of the galaxy, and you can focus on one thing, but then you want to see like the other stars and planets, so you're constantly like moving around and trying to focus in all of it, and you're trying to see as much as possible instead of just looking at the big picture. And that can kind of be like this journey of the 15. It's a unbounded quest to discover, the universe within, but it's
Yeah.
like searching for all these little points, and it's always like trying to focus in on one thing, but it wants to see the whole picture at the same time.
Yeah.
Only the device it's using is this narrow, myopic tube. And so the question, I think, for 15s is a lot of times is like, who am I? There's this constant, and that's Sagittarius too. You're talking about Sagittarius, which is this explorer, adventurous, kind of like wanting to do things and pursue a lot of things. And that is sort of the 15. They're explorers of human conditions,
Mm.
finding out all the nuances, unafraid of change at some level, but also like restless. There's a bit of
Ooh.
restlessness,
Yes.
and you're talking about the many ideas that they have, all this endless hunger for things. It's a hunger, it's a thirst for knowledge, but then at the same time it's also um hard to follow through, because when you're
Yes.
constantly trying to get more, you're at the buffet and you're trying to get more food before you even started to sit down and eat what you've got, and you just like constantly, getting more plates. And so that can be the
Totally.
challenge of it.
That is such a great analogy because that's so relatable, right? You're up at the buffet, you're eating with your eyes, and then you sit down and you're like, oh God, like, how am I going to actually consume this food? I was way over indulgent with looking at it and thinking, that looks so good. I want some of that. Oh, I want to try that. I want to try that. And then you have this mountain of food on your plate and you're like, never going to happen.
Which is the stomach, right? Your gut
Yeah.
feeling is like, oh, I know I shouldn't be eating all this, but
Yeah. And
eyes are
then if
bigger than the
you're
stomach.
And then if you're me and you don't like to waste food, you really try your best and regret it later. You're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Right, but that's very much like a double-edged sword between the 15 and the 6. You're getting hit with
Yep.
that from both sides, both frequencies. They have this, I'm gonna take it all on, I'm gonna do 80% of something, and then I'm gonna move on to something else because I'm I lose the purpose, I lose the direction of why I'm doing the thing that I'm doing. And while this 15-6 is on this beautiful, gentle spiritual journey, what happens often is we latch on to different things. And we're like, and I'll use me for example. For my spirituality, I remember really, really early on, I was tapped into my spirituality, and my mother was very spiritual. So, of course, the only 2 women or only 2 people in our family, right? So we like clung to each other because I would just listen to her stories. But as I was growing in my journey, I was finding spiritual teachers and leaders and philosophies that I was like, oh, this feels so good. I'm going to like take on every aspect of this spiritual teacher and what they have to offer, right? And then you get to that point where you're like, yeah, I think most of it is great and like it feels true to me, but it still doesn't feel like my truth. And then you move on to the next teacher or philosophy or aspect of spirituality, right? And I think it's also very much in the 3D world. You follow other people because you really don't know what your own purpose or desires are. And then, but each time, because it's like you keep repeating these circles. Each time you're like, yeah, that's great, but that no longer fits me. And I'm back on this other journey to discover what does, until you discover the answers within you. And actually, Ahzure, when you were talking about the circles and you're like the smaller circle, the way I see that, it's like the tunnel of light. There's, or not the tunnel of light. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Right. So as soon as you said it, that's exactly what I saw in my mind. And it was very much like, yeah, that light is source, right? A source is light, like that's God. So it was such a perfect example. And it just visually just brought me there. And I was like, oh yeah, how beautiful. Like that just comes together.
It's
But
so interesting hearing the way that you all talk about the symbol, because the way I've always sort of thought about the symbol is like the smaller circle is like you and your physical body and physical incarnation, and like that larger circle is more of like your auric field and your energy body that surrounds you. That's always the way I've sort of thought about it when I see it, and it's sort of that sense of feeling it, within, as in the smaller circle, like within your physical body, because I'm someone like I can definitely feel energy in my body. And that's certainly part of what this, number, again, it's getting you to connect to. What is your body telling you? How do you feel when you hear your truth? What does your body react and tell you? But then also like feeling it in those larger fields, your energetic field that surrounds you. That's kind of the way I've always pictured that symbol.
I think that's still valid,
yeah,
Yeah.
in a
same.
way that the inner circle is like you or the sole purpose, and the outer circle is the world. So like,
Yeah.
to traverse in between, there's actually a gap. And if you
Mhm.
look at the symbol of the 15 that we're talking about, and you compare that, that's the gentle journey, like Yiannah was saying. Whereas the 22 is the same circle, except it's a triangle. It's touching the sides, right?
Mm.
So the circle, when it's not touching, you're still exploring, you're still rolling around the periphery of the world. But when you've actually connected it to the 22, you actually touch the sides, you make that completion. So in a lot of ways, 15 is like a precursor, I think, to the 22, which is the completion. So you're still doing that journey to connect to spirit, but it's like there's a gap between the
Yeah.
inner and the outer. There is still that jump you have to make. And often it is a reckless pursuit for 15s to do illogical conceptions. They just go into things without really thinking about it. They'll take on these weird philosophies or, weird job occupations that people are like, what in the world? Like, why would you do that? But it's because it's not a logical thing. It's more of a gut thing. It's like, I'm just jumping in and I'm try it. And then, if I don't like it, I'll jump back out.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I think they probably get that more, the 15 gets that from like the Sagittarius side, right? That fire sign, that
Yeah.
mutable sign. Whereas the 6, which we always talk about, is afraid to take the leap, right? Without guaranteed success. If you think about its astrology sign of Taurus, a fixed earth sign, it's like you can see that even though there's a lot of overlap between these energies, obviously there is that kind of difference when it comes to taking the leap and taking a risk. But again, it all depends with these numbers. Where is it in your chart? Is something unlocked or not? So sometimes people with 15, they can still have that as a challenge. They can still not want to trust the intangible yet.
I think you can usually tell where they are. I mean, just a self um, introspection on whether you have 15 in the challenge still or you're still working on it,
Mhm.
is how many things they got going on and how risk adverse they are. I think that's
Mm,
usually a good tell. If they're very risk adverse, that means they're questioning and researching everything. They're still working through that. Or if they have too many things going on, that's leaning into the 6 challenges too, where they have a
yeah.
lot of these ideas, but they're not following through. They're not connecting it. So that can still be on the challenge side. But you'll know on the flip side, if they've actually worked through it, is they're like well talented in many areas. They have a lot of abilities, and they're really able to focus when they want to. When they pick something, they take a risk and they focus all the way through. And I think that's usually a good sign that they've been working through a lot of that. And that'll usually show up as they delve into more of their spiritual aspects.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the challenges come up when they kind of deny or resist going into spiritual stuff.
You know, I think a lot of that too is it could be that that blocked energy where you're stuck in life. And I actually know somebody who's I'm close to, and she has this big, beautiful 15-6 spiritual goal. But what I see for her often is every time I see her, I'm like, hey, girlfriend, like, what's going on? And she's still trying to figure out what job she wants and what career she wants and where she wants to live. And every time we get together, it's a different direction. Right. And she's like, well, no, this is what I want to do. And then like a few months later, I'll see her again. She's like, no, this is what I'm doing. And it's like, I just see her just being on that wheel, right? It's like that hamster wheel. It's like you just keep going in circles. And it's like, I know that moment's going to hit her. Because for me, I also associate this 15-6. What I've seen a lot with my clients is I'm giving a reading. And when I see the 15-6, it's like they almost every time have had this really fast, excuse me, really fast awakening. And I'm not saying 0 to 100, but like they'll just like, it'll be like within days or weeks or this moment that completely shifts their and alters like their reality. And they're like, oh my God, the things that I thought were true are so different than what I'm actually existing in right now and what's happening for me. And it comes fast, and they're trying to like figure out what's happening. So I see that happening for her, and I get so excited because I'm like, oh, it's like, it feels like you're just so close to just like finally being in a place where you're not blocked anymore. You're not stuck. And now you're creating, and now you're making decisions based on you. And now you're connecting on such a different level. And it is so beautiful to see. Now, the flip side of the Taurus 6 is that frustration.
Yeah.
So when we do see for her, she's got spiritual goals 15-6. And when learning in soul contracts, it's the preparatory lifetime for your next spiritual lifetime. For me, I'm like, that just pisses me off. Why can't this lifetime be that beautiful spiritual lifetime? Why do I have to wait for the next lifetime? So it brings in like that frustration for me where it's like, seriously, like I don't want to read that. And I have karmic 6s, just 6, not 15-6. So when I first got my soul contract read, I was like, this is bullshit. I don't need somebody calling out the places I'm stuck in life and the things I struggle with, and it took me a minute to come back to it and be like, oh no, this is beautiful just the way it is. But it's hard, like when somebody just calls you, or no one's calling you out, but it can feel that way. Like someone just sees right through you, and they're like, and you're like, yeah, I don't need you to see everything. Gonna go back into that 7, and I need to like
Well,
but yeah,
it's
Quick
interesting
question.
that you bring that up.
Hold
No,
on,
go
just a
ahead.
quick question. Your friend, does she have sleep pattern issues? Like, does she oversleep or have insomnia?
you know what? I don't know. So follow that thread. Continue that
I'm
thread.
doing an ongoing, study, you suppose you could say, is 15s have the sleep. That's their
Oh,
one
right. Because that's their
gateway.
quality.
And I've noticed
Yeah.
the ones that don't are working through it have a lot of weird sleep irregularities, either insomnia or they'll sleep long times. So I was just checking
Interesting.
if
I've
you're having.
definitely had sleep issues. I mean, it wasn't even just since my awakening, like that was before. And it's interesting, Yana, because like I did have that type of basically 0 to 100 type
And
of
then when
awakening.
you did the spiritual stuff, did your sleep pattern change?
Well, no. So for my thing, a big part of it has always been like the routine, right? So when I don't have a routine that tells me you're gonna have to get up in the morning, so then I don't go to bed and this. And here's the other thing that it comes up for me, and I've mentioned this in another episode of like I just feel like when my mind won't stop going. And the 6 is thought, and then that 15, which is this spiral, the wheels just will not stop turning, and I'm just laying there in bed with my brain. So a lot of times I've actually called it inspiration insomnia. I've had an idea and now I can't stop thinking about it for hours. So actually, in some ways, what has what will help my sleep a lot of the time is like having more of a routine and like having an outlet for some of these thoughts and trying to get them out and like get them through, like release that creativity. Because what's what will do it. And that was before my awakening and sense, in some ways, even more sense, because, you know, we do talk about spirit. You're more available to spirit when you're kind of starting to turn down and kind of going to sleep, which is why a lot of people do kind of have insomnia issues. And I've had these, you know, people in my life, you know, spiritual practitioners, and they're like, you got to set the boundaries. And it's like, I try, but at the same time, it's also fun. You know, it's fun to connect with spirit. So you also don't want to enforce your boundaries at the same time. But yeah, no, it's just really interesting. But yeah, it's like, I really relate, Yana, to what you're talking about that very sudden spiritual awakening where it's like, you know, it's like for me, none of the spirituality stuff was real. And then all of a sudden it just like became real all of a sudden. And it really kind of synced up with actually like my Saturn return, which I have Saturn in the eighth house. If you know astrology, I feel like that just very much made sense to me that it happened in that timing. But yeah, the 15 also is about, again, this awakening because it's about
Yeah.
sleep. So it's
Sleep
like you
awakening,
can be
yeah.
asleep. And so you can kind of then wake up to it. But the other part I wanted to mention, Yana, that you were talking about of like, if you see this in your chart and you're on a spiritual journey, don't think that this is telling you that this can't be your spiritual life,
Of
right?
course.
Obviously, right? But just to reiterate, because I think for me, what I think is helpful is when you see this in someone's chart and in your mind, you're like, why have you not awakened to the spiritual path? And then you can see this and just be like, okay, well, it's just not their plan for this lifetime. You know, it's one of those things like if you have this number and you're on the spiritual path, it's not telling you that you can't. But it can also really help to explain to someone if you're looking at someone else in your life and you're like, why have you not? I feel like you would vibe with this. Why have you not? And it's like, okay, it's your next one. That's okay.
But you know what's interesting? I don't know where this comes from, but like I've just had this thought for a long time. And I think we may have talked about it before, Lauren, where I just feel like within the next 2 years, a lot of these 15 6s are going to have that moment. There's so much
Yeah.
awakening that's happening so fast. And even if you're like 30, 40, 50, 60 years old and you're like, well, I haven't had my awakening, it doesn't mean that you can't or you won't. It literally happens like this. Something just triggers and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God. Like I'm seeing things, viewing things very differently. And then it really is up to you. Are you going to pursue that? And is that going to give you that joy where you're like, okay, now I want more and you keep going? Or are you just going to just continue your life the way it is, which is there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong.
Hey, you
I-
know, I have 15/6 in my birth name, but obviously my optimized name, I chose 22/4. So when you say this life, may not mean like physical life, it may just be the awakened life, right?
Yes.
You can
Mm.
definitely complete it in this life. Um, and it doesn't have to be like you know, like a race. For example, we're talking about ascended masters, which I've studied before. Jesus before that was embodied as David. You know, he was embodied
Mm.
as other people before he became Jesus. If you think you want to take on the life of Jesus in one lifetime, that's a lot of responsibility. You know, that's a lot. Most people be like, you know, I'm okay taking the scenic route. You know, I don't have to climb vertical up straight in one go. You know, I can enjoy it. And so we're building upon all of our lives. It's not like one is the final one. It's the whole journey is the multiple
Totally.
lives that we've come, or whatever your belief is, your tradition is. We know where we are because of where we've come from,
Mm.
right? That journey is not the destination. It's all about the process of evolving through every experience. So that 15/6 is not necessarily a down thing if it's a gentle journey. You could definitely choose to say, like, hey, I want to complete it this lifetime. I want to ascend. You can do things to work and make that happen if you so choose. But based on the contract, it's like we actually have work we want to do. And sometimes if you think of people who are really spiritually enlightened, they come back over and over again, not for themselves, to help others. So in
Right.
that
For
regards,
humanity.
like coming
Mhm.
back is not a bad thing.
Yes. And
You know,
I mean, I tend to see that a lot with a lot of people. They're like, I don't want to come back. And I'm always in my head thinking, I'm like, you say that now because life is hard. Hey, I'm not going to try and deny that, right? We're especially living in a time when life can be very difficult. But I always do think in my head, I'm like, you say that, but I feel like you're going to get back to spirit and you're going to have a whole different perspective and you'll be back. But who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to hear about sixes? Because I have plenty of sixes.
If you want to, yeah, we'll, because
Hit
we're going to
us.
have we have our whole other episode, but let's get your insights on it.
Okay. You haven't had the episode yet?
Well, no, but listen, the 15-6 is not just the 15. It is also the 6,
Right.
right? So there is that element of it too.
Okay.
But how does
Well,
that, how has that shown up for you?
yeah, because I have more of those. I have it in karmic and I have it in talents. So
Same. High
I got like
five.
5, 6 sixes going on at any given moment. But yeah, I'll just say some stuff and then you guys tell me. You tell me if you want more or not. Sixes, I imagine, is this it's a chord. You ever see like an extension cord or some string that's like everywhere? That's how I imagine sixes are. There's these,
Yeah.
it's a whole bunch of mess of a chord. And that's the ideas. There's so many ideas coming through the pipeline. I think, you're talking about the light, right? The light at the end of the tube. Because 6 is about bringing light. The Hebrew word is vav, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Vav, as opposed to 15, which is samek, which is a circle.
Mm-hmm.
Vav is just this little hooky thing. And it's
Mhm.
from Yod. Yod is seen as heavens in Hebrew, right? You're seeing heavens. Whereas Vav is that hook has Yod and it's a line down, meaning you're pulling down ideas from heaven. That's the inspiration of sixes. So when you think of divine, you just think of like cosmos, heavens, everything. It's an explosion of things. But then to make it grounded, you have to actually like pick on one thing. Like if I just said God or creator or something, you don't know what that is. You have no idea what that is. But then I say love, oh, it's an aspect of
Right.
God. Peace, it's an aspect, right? I have to define it in order to talk about the creation. If I just say creation, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if I say earth, if I say humans, then I know what specific creation that was made. That's how sixes are. They're this jumbled mess of extension cords. And it's connected to the power source. When you plug in an extension cord, it's plugged into the source. But if it's all tangled up, you don't know which one you're following. But if you stay on it, like a Taurus energy, you're saying stay stubborn, you stay and follow that extension cord all the way to the end, you can find the one. There might be other extension cords connected and not in between, but if you follow just the one all the way to the end, you'll get to the source. And that's how sixes are. Like when they're so focused, they can stay on that line and it'll bring it all the way down to the manifestation. But if they, at any moment they look away and they're switching to other chords, they don't know where they started and where they left off. And that can be that confusion. That can be that kind of disparity and not knowing what to do. And that can lead to procrastination, all the addictions, because you're like, oh, what I thought I was creating, I got excited about initially, but I got burned out by all these other ideas along the way that I forgot my initial enthusiasm. I left that at the door and then now I'm trying all these other things. And that can lead to this burnout of procrastination.
Well, right. And the symbol of the 6, right? There is a knot in the middle, right? There's that swirl, right? So it's like, that's that stuck energy, that procrastination where it's like, I have this beautiful idea I want to create and I want to do. And then and it's like, if you get stuck in that knot, it's like, you're like procrastination. You know what? I'm frustrated. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I'm giving up and I'm moving on. I don't have that guaranteed success. So I'm just not even going to attempt. But when you go into that addiction energy, that is also very much that 15, where if you do have in a karmic placement, it can be like that addiction energy could show up very strong. And again, we are not meant to stay in the struggle of any frequency on our chart. We are meant to come into the optimistic and into the positive aspect of the chart. I truly believe that every single human on earth has the opportunity to become enlightened, has the opportunity to have this beautiful life. But on the earth plane, we get stuck in our own shit. You take on other people's expectations and programming, the way you were raised and society and everything. And everyone nowadays is struggling with their self-worth and their disempowerment, and they don't know how to step into their own power of who they are. But it's like we complicate it so much. And then we get stuck in addictions. We get stuck in these sabotaging patterns that don't serve us. But sometimes it could be so hard to find your way out of that knot, out of that addiction, procrastination, stuck energy, to come out to that beautiful, because that 6-6 is co-creation. You're creating. It's co-creation. So as you're pulling source, you're like, okay, you're getting these beautiful ideas from source, and you're able to create them, to manifest them into reality. And that is the ultimate goal. You know, the 15-6 is such a creative, beautiful frequency, and there's so much beauty in it, but it can be easy to stay into that, especially Azure, you know, with all your 6s. I have 6s too. Well, I like my addiction is food. Okay. And in a way where like I can eat this, when I find something I love, I can eat that same exact meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, for like 5 weeks in a row. And then on that 5th week, I'm like, if I never look at this food again, I will be so happy. You know, my addiction then gets to the point where it's like crazy, and I move on to the next thing. But, you know,
Yeah,
it shows up differently for everybody.
and I think that's a good point, you know, and I'm in agreement. There is no judgment at all with
0.
any of these negative aspects, right? None of this is bad per se, like addictions and sleep issues. None of this is bad. I think
Right.
the beauty of knowing the soul contract numbers and readings is that it's sort of like I mean, Nicholas calls it the discovering the spiritual map. But in a way, for me, I look at the karmic aspects or things that show up in life as sort of the lights on the car. You know, when you have a check engine filter, you have tire, you know, you have actual feedback system, and we don't have that in our normal livelihoods. We don't have that in our relationships. So having this sort of like kind of flag to say, hey, look, oh, I do have an addiction, you know, that's not a bad thing. That's just a way to begin the journey, the self-reflection of what's causing that. I noticed when I have this thing called what's it called? Sleep reverse procrastination or reverse sleep procrastination. Have y'all heard of
What?
this?
No.
Did you make that up?
I didn't know it was a thing till I read it. Apparently when you have a lot of busy schedule, and then you're like tired at the end of the day, but because you didn't get all the stuff you wanted to do, you stay up a lot longer than you intended to. So you're procrastinating on your sleep, and it's
Got
a
it.
revenge. Oh yeah, not reverse. It's revenge sleep procrastination. So you're taking out on yourself. You're like, I'm gonna sleep less because I didn't do all the stuff I wanted. But at the same time, like you don't actually do productive stuff. So it could just be like watching anime or cartoons or something, you know. So it's not even like it's
That's
not
so
like a
funny.
good, yeah, it's called revenge sleep procrastination. And I noticed when I'm doing that, I'm like, oh God, why did I stay up this late? It's because of that 6. I'm blocking something in my creativity. I'm not getting what I wanted done. So then it's a point of self reevaluation and like, oh, I need to get back in alignment. So it's not a bad thing. I wouldn't say any of these numbers are bad either.
You know, it's interesting what you just said about the watching, you know, you're putting something on TV and you're avoiding your sleep. For me, when I was stuck in that knot of that 6 energy where I was not creating, I had goals and I had visions and I had things I wanted to do. But part of that 6, right, is that lack of free will, depending on where it sits on your soul contract chart. So for me, it's in a karmic placement. We talked about that. And I would have nights where for like weeks on end, I had this list of these things I wanted to accomplish. And every day I woke up and I was like, today's the day. I'm going to do 1 or 2 or 5 of these things on my to-do list that I've had for like ever. And I would find myself outside of, you know, my work, I would find myself playing mindless games on my phone or watching some ridiculous TV show that I really don't care about. And in my mind, in the moment, being very well aware of the fact that I really want to do this other thing, but I cannot get myself to do it for the life of me. It's not happening. And then what happened was, as I started understanding more about that blocked energy, and I was like, okay, I need to move, I need to create. I would literally do creative stuff. I would draw, and I'm a terrible artist. Okay, that is like nothing I ever will claim. But I would draw, I would do things, I would move my body. And then I found myself getting out of that stuck frequency. And then I'm at the other end now where it's just constantly doing, doing, doing. And sometimes I do fantasize. I'm like, man, remember that day where I literally had nothing to do? Like I did nothing and I watched TV and I played a game on my phone and I was like relaxed. I kind of miss that. I wish I could just have it for like 2 hours, just a 2 hour block. But that's what happens when you come out of that stuck energy. Now you're focused and you're doing, doing, doing. You're just constantly creating. And it is such a beautiful feeling.
I want to just highlight that tool you mentioned kind of secretly. This is a really great tool for people with sixes. Is as soon as you notice, first it takes the awareness. You notice that it's blocked. That could be in procrastination. It could be in anger, frustration, any of these things that are flagging. Then you notice that you're blocked in the creativity, and then you just go do something. It doesn't even matter what. Something peripheral, creative. That could just be drawing, like you're saying. It could be singing, dancing, going out in nature, anything creative. It's not even remotely related to what you're doing.
Right.
But just by doing that for like 15 minutes, what happens is the sacral chakra gets blocked on sixes a lot. So once it's blocked, that leads to the anger. By doing something creative, you unblock that and then you come back and you'll find that it's so much easier to focus or at least do progress on what your project was. And that's a tool I think is wonderful for sixes.
I was very well aware of the fact that while the drawing helped me, that it was the dancing that like triggered and unblocked me. And it was literally within a matter of days. But it was very much like I was very in touch with the dancing. I wasn't just like, swaying back and forth, and not kind of dancing I would show anybody, right? Because you're just like, you know what? Nobody's watching. I don't give a shit. I'm just going to move my body however my body moves to the music. And I am a firm believer, and I know for a fact that that is the thing that unblocked all these freaking sixes that I have across all my names. And then it just felt like the floodgates finally opened and you're like, go, and you're running. And that free will now is at play. So yeah.
That I think again, you're hitting on a very important point. Creativity, the hugest block is that self-critic. When we have so much creative, abilities coming out, that judgment that it's not right, it's not perfect, that's actually what blocks us from allowing it to flow. So when you dance like nobody's looking, nobody's business, it's simply just self-affirming that I know the light within. Like I know this creative energy I have is divine. Like I'm not gonna stop it or judge it anymore. That unblocks that energy.
Oh yeah.
And that's, something we can apply to all life and spirituality is like when we stop judging ourselves, we actually unblock things. But, it takes a little bit of that awareness to say, oh, I'm just going to do something where no one cares. I'm going to do something out of my comfort zone because I'm judging myself from doing what I want to do. So by going out of the comfort zone, I'm telling the ego, hey, look, it's okay. Just take a chill pill, sit in the back seat for a minute. I'm just going to do whatever. And by doing that, we're allowing the flow to happen. And that's a huge thing with sixes is that flow and creativity go together. If you have a blank canvas, the first line is usually the biggest challenge. Like just putting something down and saying, I'm going to start drawing. I'm going to start doing that is a big challenge from that self-criticism.
Oh yeah. Lauren?
I don't know. I have, I'm just trying to think if some of the things that you've said and things have come to mind for me. I mean, yeah, I totally can relate to, I guess I think for me, it's a lot more of the focus. I mean, it can also be that procrastination, but again, for me, it's like I do relate to being like having ADHD, and I always relate the six energy to the ADHD. And so, Jan, I don't believe you identify as someone who has ADHD, correct?
I do. Yeah. I think
it comes and it goes.
Because I was like, because this was the thing, is like there have been things that you've been saying. And I was like, I know that you don't really consider yourself, or we haven't, like, you haven't talked about that to the same degree I have. I was like, and yet, when you were talking about for the life of me, I can't get myself to do it. I'm like, oh, I totally relate to that. And I think for me, it's a lot more of the focus. I mean, it can also be that procrastination, but again, for me, it's like I do relate the six energy to the ADHD. And so, Jan, I don't believe you identify as someone who has ADHD, correct?
it comes and it goes.
because I was like, because this was the thing, is like there have been things that you've been saying. And I was like, I know that you don't really consider yourself, or we haven't those of us who are neurodivergent, we call that executive dysfunction, and we talk about that in the thing. And then you talk about eating the same meal for 5 days. I'm like, yeah, we call that a dopamine meal, and then the dopamine doesn't hit, and you need to find a new meal. So I
Which
was
is the
just like,
addiction.
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
I'm
I mean,
self-prescribed ADD too. So I think you're
yeah.
on it, Lauren. I think you're
Yeah. So
right.
I was just like, I know you don't necessarily like wave that flag for yourself. I was like, and yet these things that you're saying, but I think it just goes to show how similar that six energy is, just how much of an overlap there is. And that, what, again, there are labels, right? Whether you want to use that label or not, it's like, this is clearly a way that that energy manifests. And then a lot of people who probably have that energy in their chart just happen to use that label for themselves, Yeah.
I think it is. I mean, it would be cool to do a study across like 100 people or whatever and just see how many sixes have ADHD, like actually diagnosed. But it is a label.
Yeah.
And I think the labeling part I don't necessarily agree with,
Right.
but I do think ADD or ADHD, however you define it, is actually a superpower. It's just
100%.
a matter of way the brain works.
Mm-hmm.
And it runs into the 15 because 15 is all about expansion. So how I look at it is you're driving on the freeway. Most people without ADD or ADHD, they drive on one lane. But people with sixes, ADD, ADHD, they drive on multiple lanes at the same time. They're not, their
Oh,
brain does not function the same as
yeah.
other people. I think it's simply just a wiring thing. Like we're able to drive on multiple lanes and do think of a lot of things simultaneously that other people don't see it that way. That's why to a teacher teaching, a middle schooler, they'd be like, focus, bring your attention. Like to me, I was like, I am focusing. I'm just focusing on like four things at the same time. Like, what do you mean? It's
Yeah.
just a different way to define it. But I think it's a superpower because by going in different lanes, also known as thinking outside the box, we're not thinking the same as other people. We're
Right.
thinking of different ways to do things, the same thing, but different ways to do it. That's creative. That's the whole that's where creation comes from, is like not doing something the same way as everyone else has done before. We did it a different way. How? Because we didn't think the same way as them. Like that's a superpower. That's an ability.
Yeah. And, there's other, numbers and energies that I think can really kind of overlap, obviously, with being neurodivergent, right? We've talked about with the 11-2, autism, with the fives and empaths, so I definitely, I think we could have a whole conversation just about like neurodivergence
Yeah,
and
that'd be
the
cool
different
to see like which
energies.
ones pair well with others
Yeah.
or work against it.
And just in this time of, you know, the world changing and bringing in more spiritual energy, right? And it's like, I think part of that is then us being, having these different brains, these brains that are maybe wired differently. Now, some of us, we've maybe you've had that label, right? You've had that diagnosis or you've carried that identity for a long time before the spiritual world, before the world was becoming more spiritual. But, one of the things that's just a struggle is that it's how do you live in this world that wasn't designed for you, right? And again, I think there's kind of this overlap between when you have these spiritual beliefs, but you're living in this very 3D world. And how do you kind of carry all those things when you're still trying to, pay rent and afford groceries and all those things? And so I think there's even that sort of general overlap as well of like the world is changing. And I think it's even changing in a way that is going to be designed to be more inclusive, right? I think that, a spiritual world would be like that. And people who are neurodivergent would really benefit from a world that's more prepared to have these different viewpoints. If
Here's
that
where I
makes
take a
sense.
stand.
Yeah.
I'm all about empowerment, and this is the 15. 15 is that social injustice. Sagittarius, we're
Right.
freedom fighters. We naturally want to stand for what's right and support others. I think that if you stick to the label, the prescription of the Western medicine is to give you medicine to keep
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
focused. I actually just reject that whole theory altogether. I actually say lean into your own abilities. Like I don't really believe in the label in that sense, because I think we should empower those people who have these ways of thinking to set, they're going to pave the way for the new generation. If people are stuck in the same path, they're not going to grow and evolve. We need different mindsets to actually jump out of where we are. So
No, for
I
sure.
actually
No,
go for that.
that's really what I'm saying. Is just in the sense of when, and essentially exactly where it's like where you don't need to try and be medicated because it's no longer you have to adapt to this world. Like the world is ready now to adapt to you and to look to you at what this perspective has.
Or
And
just
also,
grow together. We're just ready to
yeah,
evolve together. You know, it's not
right.
us versus them.
No, for sure. But in the world as it is right now, that's often how people find it, right? That they are not able to function as themselves because the world basically is like, you have to adapt to me, or it's just we're going to create failure for you, essentially. You know what I mean? So
But
I
that's
guess,
what y'all are doing. Y'all are breaking out of that concept. You're telling
right.
people there's a different way to think about it too.
Yeah. And I think part of it is just as people share their story and share their acceptance or their stories, where we can just find acceptance in being like, it is okay to eat the same meal 3 times a day for 5 weeks if that's what you want to do. Like, we don't
Girl,
need to
it
judge
is
that.
not. It's not.
People got cravings. Sorry, Yana.
It is not, because you know what happens? You ruin some of your favorite meals and then you're like, I never want to see it again. And
No,
that's,
you just
you
find
know,
another thing you're addicted to for a while, and then you
right,
switch,
totally.
back and forth.
Yeah.
You know, but it's this repetitive cycle and it's like you want to get off of it, but it's very much tied into that 15 where it's like they just keep, it's like they keep going in circles. And one of the things that I actually love, and Lauren, we've talked about this before, but it's like what I've also found with the 15-6s is they will, they want to make a point, and that point they will say it 5 different ways because like they have to get it out in each way, but each time they're actually saying the same exact thing but using different words. And something that cracks me up is this phrase that a family member had said to me years ago. I was sharing a story and he looks at me across the table and he goes, Yana, he goes, I really just need you to land the plane. And I was like, what kind of bullshit is that? How can you? I was cracking up, but at the same time, I was like, how can you say that to me? But I got it. I understood it. I'm like, I don't need a 1,000-word essay to say this 100-word statement of what my point to get across. And so I very much find that in the 15-6, they just keep reiterating the same thing. But to them, it feels I'm trying to hit different angles, and they don't really realize in the moment that they're just repeating themselves. And the other person's like, land the plane, please. And you're like, okay, yes, and let me land the plane. And we're there. So it just cracks me up, but it's very much that going in circles. You're rethinking stuff so many different ways. And it's just like, let it go. It's okay. Go
Well,
ahead, Laura.
no, well, no. It's just that because, like, you and I have had this. I've had this with another friend of mine and I always look at it as well in like my Pisces Mercury, right? Those fish are swimming in circles. And it's just interesting because for you, you're saying the same thing from a slightly different angle. And I'm like, to me, every single one of those points is different and unique.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And so it is just this difference, and it's hard,
To pick one and be
well,
satisfied with it.
I mean, so there's multiple areas, right? Where it could be to me that like, I said 3 different things that are all in my mind completely unique. And for you, that was the same thing 3 different ways. And I'm
Right.
like, no, that was point A, B, C. And A is not B and B is not C. Like they are different and unique. Like there is not just saying one of those and having it be the same. Like something would go unsaid. Now, the other part of it is like this need for me, and this comes from like my Enneagram of like needing to be understood. The understanding is key. So for me, I'm going to keep talking until I feel I have been understood. So when someone's like, land the plane, I'm like, you pave the runway to show me you've understood me, and the plane will land. But this plane is not landing until I have been understood. I will keep saying it 100 different ways because I'm like, is this the way that you understand me? Is this the way that you understand me? Is this the way that you understand me? So it's just one of those things where it's like, for the other person who's like talking to me, if this is happening, and it's like, you saying the same thing, I'm like, well, I'm saying the same thing because you haven't made me feel understood. in
Do you
all
have
of
any
the things that
threes
I'm saying.
anywhere, Lauren?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Sixes and threes go together in a way because that's the expression and communication, right?
Yeah.
So like that speaking, and then the six is a lot about creative expression as well. So
Yeah.
by saying it multiple ways and speaking it, understanding it, that's gonna be important, integral. So
For sure.
people, I don't know, I'm guessing your other friend, Yiannah, might have 11 twos. You know, they need that structure. They like just get me to the just say what you need versus someone who has sixes. We're like, oh yeah, great. Tell me the 40 different shades of blue. I want to
Yeah.
know. Let me know the difference.
Well, you know, Janelle Williams, who was our first guest on the podcast, one of the reasons she and I really bonded early in our relationship is we both have Pisces Mercury. So we send each other voice notes that, like, a relatively short voice note for us is 4 to 6 minutes. Like, we will send each other voice notes that are like 10, 12 minutes long. And I'll be saying to her, I'm like, I realize I've kind of been saying the same thing 3 times. I appreciate that you're a Pisces Mercury and you're not going to judge me for doing this. Because I do know that I have other friends where it's like, that's annoying for them. And what's interesting, Yiannah, I don't know, do you know your astrology chart well enough to know your Mercury sign?
I haven't. So you keep talking and I'm going to get it.
You're
I'm
going to
gonna pull
grab it?
I am.
So this other friend where this had kind of come up as not like an, you couldn't solve an issue, but it just had come up as a thing in our relationship was this thing with the communication where I really think I've said two completely unique different things, let alone AB. I think I've said AZ. You know what I mean? Like it's so different. And she's like, you just said that. I'm like, no, I didn't. This thought didn't even occur to me when I said the first thing. How could I have said that before? And to my mind, they're so different. And it's just really interesting because she has a Sagittarius Mercury. And so since I have this Pisces Mercury and they're both mutable signs, that means that they're squaring. And again, if you don't know astrology, like when you have a square, it's just very kind of conflicting communication and thinking sort of styles. So it makes me laugh. And I think it just kind of goes to sort of prove the validity even more of the astrology that like, here's one of our issues
I
or
think
where we've had some tension and it's like the communication and they're squaring. So I would almost feel like, do you have maybe like a Gemini Mercury or something? Because that would also be a
what you're
square.
saying about Sagittarius, which is also the 15, right?
Yeah.
Sagittarius is they like everyone loves them because they're so friendly. Even when they're disagreeing, it's like, hey, let's still work together on it.
But they can also be blunt. That's one of the
Yes,
things
they
that we
can.
say with this work. And so I think that's where it is, where she's like, you said that. And I'm like, no, I didn't. What do you have, Yiannah?
Okay, if I'm reading this correctly, my Mercury is in Aries in my 12th house.
Okay.
Is that correct? Does that make sense?
I mean, it could be. I mean, it definitely could be. It just depends if you're looking at the symbol. So it's like if you look at like it looks kind of like Venus, but it has like almost like a hat on top, like a U on top of the circle.
Yeah,
like
it's
a
in my
little hat.
12th house.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It's more about the sign. So it's the Aries means they're not squaring. I was wondering if you maybe had, I guess you couldn't have had Gemini because you're also an Aries sun. So Gemini,
No.
it can't be that far away. Mercury can't be that far away.
What's your second one? Is it your moon? Like
Yeah,
the main
like your
three?
sun, moon, rising.
Yeah, so my
Yeah.
moon is in Gemini.
Okay.
I know I'm Aries, moon, Aquarius, I believe. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So actually our moons are squared each other because I have a
See,
Pisces
you
moon
you
also.
say that, and for me, I hear a completely different language where I'm like, okay, sounds good. Like I don't know what that means, but sure.
Lauren saying it a different way, but the same.
It means that there is tension in our emotional expression. In theory,
There you
theoretically.
go.
I'm sure that's just our strong Aries
Yeah.
energy that's like, I'm leader, no, I'm leader. But you and I, we've talked about this, have this beautiful way of, and it's rare that we've had that moment where it's like, okay, we really need to resolve this. But when we do, it comes together so beautiful. And you and I are such great lessons and teachers for each other in so many ways. And I know for me specifically, it's that I don't have to have my way all the time. I don't have to, it's not my way or the highway. It's not my way is the best way. My 10-1 comes in too. And it's like that humbling, you know what? Someone else thinks this is more important than you think it's important. So it's okay. Let them have it. Let give that up kind
Yeah.
of thing. And it's such a beautiful balancing relationship in that way. So I don't care. They could square all they want. You know, it shows up. It
Well,
works
I think
beautifully.
y'all have worked on it spiritually. That's probably why it works
Yeah.
out. You know, this is also the six energy, the Taurean energy. The sixes have this my way or the highway attitude.
Right.
Because when they're creative, they're like, I'm inspired from God. What do you mean I'm wrong? Like, that can't be true. I took it from heaven. Like, it came to me in my sleep or during meditation. So there's that bit like, oh, we have to sit back. There's another tool for sixes is like anytime someone disagrees with the six. I used to do this with my dad. We're like a bunch of Tauruses in the family. And every time we disagreed, it wasn't that his idea wasn't better. It was just that he didn't agree with my idea at the moment.
Right. So you couldn't get past to see the
and
value.
I would
100%.
argue about the little fickleness of how great my idea was. And now I know the trick is just be like, let me sleep on it. Like,
Right.
I'm not going to deal with this right now. It's like, that's a good idea. Let me think about it. And by stepping away and thinking about it for however long, an hour or a day, I come back and I'll be like, okay, the better idea should win, not my idea.
Right.
And that's
Totally.
invaluable to a six, like to be able to say like, hey, we have a disagreement and one of us has great ideas. Let's just agree when we're both in a calm down space where we can do that.
Totally. And it's very much that stubbornness of the Taurus, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like,
100%.
but I want my idea to win, even though maybe not in the moment, or maybe in the moment, I realize that your idea is better. It's like that punch to the gut of like, you're rejecting my idea. So all I can think about is the fact that you're rejecting my idea, and my stubbornness wants to dig my heels in. And it's like, I mean, I know for me personally, that was such a huge thing for me. But once I spiritually got to the point where I was like, you know what? I am open to everything. What I know is I know nothing. And the things that I thought I knew last year and 5 years ago and 10 years ago are not the things that I know now. So I'm very open to things just constantly changing and growing and evolving. And that is what helped me step off the stubborn train, step off the my way or the highway, or I know best and let me lead, to taking that step back and going, okay, what is the best situation? And do I really care that much? Or am I just being stubborn and my ego wants to win?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So it's like when you step in that, it makes things so easy. And our thing, we've talked about this a million times. Our thing is, do you want to die in that hill? And sometimes it's like you're fighting for it, but then it's like, no, I really don't want to die in the hill. So it's like, okay, then we move on. We have our answer, resolution, on to the next thing. You know, so
Well,
it's so many factors.
Lauren was talking about the double-edged sword. You know, sixes, that persistence to follow through and see something to the end. At the opposite end is stubbornness.
Yeah.
If you think about it, if you're stubborn about a great idea and you hold on to it, that's a good thing, right? It's
Yep.
good to be stubborn at certain cases. But when it's to the detriment of your own project failing or, you know, communication, then that's when like you're exemplifying beautifully is that reevaluate and see what is actually for the highest best purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the 15 with the stomach and that internal feeling of telling you when is the case that you need to hold on to it and when is the case that you need to let it go. Because it can be hard to know sometimes. You're like, okay, is this not really, seeming to work out? Because we talk a lot of times of like, when something is meant for you, it'll kind of be easy. It'll come together. If you're having to really struggle with it, like maybe it's just not aligned. Maybe it's not meant to be. And it's like, it's sometimes hard to know when you're supposed to persist and see it through to the end and when you're supposed to be like, you know what? I'm letting it go. So that's that internal feeling that
Good
tells
bringing
you.
it back to the 15. And the stomach is really important. I've noticed stomach issues for people with 15.
Yeah.
If
Mm-hmm.
they're not, aligned, a lot of them
Yeah.
have indigestion or stomach pains, ulcers,
Yep.
that kind of thing. And that indecision is pretty prevalent in 15s, I've noticed. Like they have trouble really picking one because the Sagittarius is all about freedom. It's all about like, I want all the options. But then when you give them too many options, it's like going to the restaurant with like 60 pages on the menu. You're like, oh, well, this is going to take a while, And the waiter's like, anytime now, do you want to order? It's just like, there's too many options. That's kind of scary for a 15. They
Right.
actually
Yeah.
need a little bit of, minimal choice, multiple choice options.
Absolutely. We talk about it a lot as, trying on every hat until you know which one you want to buy. Or actually, the analogy I really love is like, you go to the ice cream parlor, and even if you like the first one you try, you still want to try every flavor to know which one you really want.
Yeah. Baskin
And
31 hates us.
That
yeah,
kills me.
right.
31 flavor.
And
Wait, let me try the pecan. Let me try.
And I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I really feel like sometimes it'll take me an hour to figure out what I want to watch. Like I'll start something for like 5 minutes and I'm like,
Oh
no. Or
God.
even just like 2 minutes, I'm like,
Oh
no. And I'm
God.
spending an hour figuring out what to watch. And I had this thing with a friend where we would both kind of actually it's the same one where we had the kind of Mercury issues coming through. But it would be like, okay, what do you want to watch? Well, I don't care. Like whatever you want. Neither of us are wanting to make the decision. So I kind of made this rule of like, okay. First person puts up 5 options. The next person narrows it down to 3, and then the first person makes the decision. Because it's like, we're each trying to be considerate of like, I want to give you a say. I want to give you a say. No one's trying to make a choice. So it's like, okay, 5 to 3 to 1.
Yeah, you
Because it's
kind of have
like,
to limit
yeah,
15 to choices. Otherwise, they don't decide.
That's the other thing I think about with the symbol, again, with it being a circle, is I really think about a horse. And if you put a horse like just in a wide open field, they say that that can actually really stress the horse out. Like they actually want to be in something that's somewhat enclosed for that
Yeah, that's why they
safety.
have blinders, right?
Yeah, like they
Make them
know
let it
where they
ride.
can
Yeah.
go.
Mm.
So I think about that actually with the symbol as well, with the circles of like, that's the pen for the horse to
Stay in the
ride, to
circle. Yeah.
run away in, because it's like otherwise it's just like I'm stuck not
That's
knowing where
very
to go or
interesting.
not.
Yeah. I think that shows up in relationships, especially with 15/6s. There's that bit of that non-committal, like don't want to commit because that freedom is taken away once you decide. And we were talking about pairing with numbers. I think 15/6s go well with eights.
Yeah.
Eights have that grounding, unless it's both karmic. Then you have a lot
Right.
of
Excuse
commitment
me, I
issues.
have karmic 6s and karmic 8s. Okay, take it easy.
Perfect
Ye-
pairing.
yeah, it's funny because I have a girlfriend, different girlfriend, and when we go to dinner, she's gluten-free, she's dairy-free, she's all these things, right? So you'd think like your options are limited anyway.
Mhm.
And we go to places that cater to those types of allergies and requirements, right? Which is great. But then like it will literally, from the 5 options that are there, the waiter or waitress will come back like 5 times and she's like, I'm not ready yet. And I'm like, oh my God, take a deep breath. There are 5 options. Let's narrow this down. Like, let's just get all 5. Let's just make it easy. Let's just get all 5. So I get
Or
that
let's
whole
come back
like
here 5 times. So you're gonna get one each time.
totally, totally. And
Buffet
I'm
next
like,
time. Just take her to a
yeah,
buffet.
yes. And it's like,
Well, we
girlfriend,
also
we've
know
been
that
here
that
how
doesn't do
many
us well
times?
either.
That is so
You
funny.
should try that trick with that Laura was saying. The next time, be like, all right, first 5, narrow it down to 3, 2, and then you pick
No,
one.
listen, I just know like once I commit, I'm like, okay, I started this thing. I need to see it to the end. Even if it's like a series where I'm like, it's okay. Well, it's like I started, I need to know how it ends, whether I'm fully engaged or not. So I have to see it to the end. And I'm also the person who like, I'll go to a restaurant and my addiction says, you loved this food. You're going to get it every single time at that same restaurant because it was fantastic there. Or I'll literally look at the menu and right away I'm like, I'm just choosing this and I'm calling it a day. That whole like for me comes quickly. But other things could take me a while to really decide, But the stupid
In
things
that
that
case,
don't
your
matter.
addiction. In that case, your addiction makes you really quick to decide, which is good.
Right. Totally. Totally. Okay. Any final thoughts, final words, anything that we want to throw in there about this beautiful 15/6?
I don't think so. I feel like I've covered it all.
Yeah. Azure.
Just that all these numbers are beautiful, but having 15/6s, I've noticed that it's a separate ability, like we can think differently and we explore differently than other people. And that's sort of why life is exciting, because no one is the same. If we were all the same, it would be quite boring, at least for my 15/6s. I like to see the
Yeah.
diversity, and I encourage anyone who has the same struggles that we've brought up, or feel like they fall into these if they haven't done a reading, to just know that that's part of the gift. It's the same coin, just a different side of it. And if you just realize by going into the spiritual aspect, really, which is discovering who you are, then you'll find that anything there's a struggle in life, that's actually where the hidden talents are. And by having, so many sixes, I've known that that was my biggest struggle for the longest time. Now I just embrace it fully and be like, yeah, it's creative. What are you going to do? I'm going to have 10 ideas by the time you've thought of half of one. It's just what I do.
Get it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, here's what I want to say. This 15-6, the 15 being all about the stomach, right? Your discernment is everything. And being able to go, how does this feel in my gut? That will be the answer and the direction to follow. And your discernment, your gut will never fail you. And as you awaken, as you step into the beauty of this frequency, following that gut, trusting that gut, is going to lead you to like the most beautiful things. So I just think that it's just such a beautiful,
Yeah. And the right kidney for the sixes. If you feel like you're getting burned out and tired, like sleep issues, that's also a sign to realign yourself to the things you really love to do.
yes,
Mhm.
I love
Yeah.
it. Okay,
you.
Ahzure,
Been fun.
why don't you let our listeners know where they can find you?
Sure. I'm building a network at lightenergies.net. You can email me at ahzure6@gmail.com, or you can also find anything about Ascended Masters, which I have a podcast on, at www.gatheringofchilas.com.
Love it.
Wonderful. Well, everybody, head over to our Instagram. Let us know what you've thought of today's episode, what you think about these numbers. Do they show up in your chart? Do you have ADHD? Do you have sixes? Did you have a sudden spiritual awakening as someone with a 15-6? Our Instagram is the Let's Talk Vibes podcast, and our website, the ltvpodcast.com, to book a reading with Yiannah or myself, or to get a free copy of your chart.
Yes. And as always, everybody, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment on our content. It is the best way to support us, and we appreciate it so much. Have a beautiful, blessed day. Bye.
Bye.